Okay. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk, I would say the main two things we're going to talk about is discussions and then some kind of a quiz. And here at APU, let me show you my next little picture. Here at APU, so this is meant to be a diagram of a blended course. Here at APU, you as faculty can add online elements to a face-to-face course to make it blended. But part of ITT, the other side of our house, so I'm in faculty support, is they develop online courses. So that would be a different thing. If you're going to develop a fully online course versus a blended course, that typically would go to our shop and we would develop it. So what this is trying to show is that you might have class that maybe used to meet on Tuesday and Thursday, now meets only on Tuesdays and the rest is online. So that's just kind of an example of a blended model. And here's a definition of flipped for you. I put Flipper in there, his friend. Students learn new content online and do more activities in person, basically. Although you can certainly do a lot of activities online as well. So some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, you could actually use some of the principles, either face-to-face or online. And I'm going to try not to have too much upfront stuff, but I don't know if there's anyone that was in the first session. So there's a little bit of overlap I want to do. And one is to differentiate between sort of media and methods. So the delivery vehicle or the media could be face-to-face and online, but you may use the same methodology across, whether it's case study, use of examples, and so forth. So be confident in knowing that you can leverage, for those of you who are maybe newer to online, you can leverage a lot of the techniques you use face-to-face in the online format. And here's another diagram. I like Venn diagrams. And I found out recently there was someone named Venn, John Venn, and he developed these diagrams many years ago. So I like to talk about this because people may not, I like to really kind of deconstruct some of the elements we're talking here, computer delivered versus instructor-led. So right now we're having an instructor-led session. It is synchronous, meaning we're all experiencing it at the same time. Or you could have instructor-led on the computer. Most people here at APU don't do that. That'd be like an Adobe Connect session or Skyping, Hangouts. Does anyone do those kind of sessions in their classes? Yeah, it's not that common. It's a tool, and I hope we get to a place where we're doing a little more of that. So that's one option. It's instructor-led, computer-delivered. This is more where we live here at APU. It's on the computer, but it's asynchronous. So this is the basic assumption: is that your Sakai courses, there's a faculty assigned to it, but you're not all logged in at the same time. In the corporate world, so I come more from the corporate world, this is where we live. There's no instructor associated with the classes. There's just self-running modules. But this is a tool that's also available to you, especially in terms of using publisher-provided materials. And I have a capture from one of those. So, for example, Pearson has a lot of online supplementary materials where if you use their textbook, they have online quizzes, simulations, kind of electronic flashcards. Do any of you use that kind of thing? Yeah, right now. Okay, good. And yeah, Deborah, you do. Okay. All right. And this is just a quickie thing talking about when to use synchronous versus asynchronous. So it says here, in general, work that requires reflection is better done in an asynchronous mode. So the problem is, whenever it's in the, so most like, in our model here, the synchronous part, because you said you're not really doing online synchronous, is the face-to-face. So the risk is, do students have time to reflect when they're physically in your classroom? Because everyone is marching along at the same time, unless you break up for individual work or group work or something like that. So you may parcel out the things that require that reflection either outside of class, or you break up your time in class for them to do that individual work. The second bullet says, events that benefit from synergy, social exchanges, and so forth are well suited to the group environment. And then it says, consider, the combination, of course. And one of the things, the big elements, important thing to consider with the different modalities is feedback. So asynchronous online, your Sakai thing, has the slowest turnaround. And then this one, in the live session, you may give feedback. Someone has a question, you give feedback. But the bottleneck is, of course, I can only deal with one person at a time. So in this scenario, everyone can respond. Or this one we can supplement in the live synchronous session. We can supplement with something like, is anyone using any live polling and those kind of tools? So those give immediate feedback to a large group of people. So you can integrate technology, of course, within the physical classroom. Another thing we want to talk about is peer grading. So you have peer grading, you can get that feedback very quickly to a lot of people, or you can send out your rubric or your answer key, things like that. So there are some inherent problems with these different media that we want to be aware of. If you want to start blending your course, you want to kind of know what you're working with. And this is just something I like to talk about, is when you think about your learning objectives, what is inherent to your topic that you're teaching, and you're trying to decide, do you want to put some things online, is to kind of analyze the key tasks that you're really teaching. And again, I come from the corporate world. We focus more on tasks versus conceptual information. So, this may not absolutely apply to you, but what is it that they have to do to show mastery of whatever that learning objective is? And do you need to see it? So that was something where, I used to think, well, we have to be there in classroom. But even now, we can kind of bust that up if you feel comfortable asking them to videotape or audio tape. So something that requires this expert review where you need to see it. Can someone else give me an example of a task that students do that you're kind of wondering, I wonder if I could put that online? Do I need to review it? Can we do peer review? Can someone else give an example?
Art project.
Okay, good. An art project. Okay, good. So I guess that would depend if it's like a drawing or painting. Dance. So Frank knows that I dance. So I think about these things of like, could you, I do look at Google video, some videos on YouTube and stuff, and I have learned quite a bit from videos. But to evaluate dancing, you'd need to probably videotape it. I really don't know of any other way, a dance performance type thing. Okay, so this is just a little progression where whatever the task is you want to teach, the most important thing the students need to walk away with needs to be reflected in the objective, needs to be taught, needs to be in the key activity of the course, and needs to be assessed. So we need to see that through line. There's no funny business. Students know what they're getting into, what they've learned, they're tested on it. So whatever some of those major things are should be your biggest consideration when you're deciding, should I put some of these things online? Of course, there are kind of sub-objectives, supporting objectives, and so forth. But these are some of your major considerations as you're considering putting some of your content online. And this diagram I stole, and people tend to really like it. The idea is, should we do, so what's being proposed? So this is Bloom's taxonomy of objectives. So this goes back. This is kind of saying things that we ask students to do can be greater, can be more or less complex. Okay? So less complex is kind of down here, and then more complex is up here. So this particular person said, well, maybe before class we can have them do some lower levels of objectives. During class, that gets higher, and then after class, we can get at a higher level still. And imagine this is on one kind of basic subject. Or maybe there's some background knowledge that lets you get to a level where you're practicing in class something at a little bit of a higher level. Does this make sense? Does this make some sense? Okay. So people tended to like that. And working with some people actually put a before, during, and after class structure in their syllabus, where they really laid out very clearly in a table. This is what we do before, during, and after. So students can kind of get that structure. This is how we're addressing a certain topic, before, during, and after, and what the activities are. And here's an example. Okay. train supervisors on how to write questions, interview questions. Pre-work is reading, and in class they're going to do practice on writing the questions. After class they're going to actually write the questions. And now we're going to talk about pre-work for the next part of it is how to interview, so kind of back to you, and then doing the interview. So here's a sample structure for a blended curriculum. And then here's another one. I kind of like this one. This is a web design course. Quizzing. Now, the quizzing is something that people are finding it can be very helpful. Sakai supports it very well to help make sure students do the reading. It's kind of holding their feet to the fire, kind of ensuring they do the reading. So quizzing, a mock usability test in class, use end of class for live troubleshooting. So this is the kind of thing where we really exploit the expertise of the instructor, that they're going to model for the student how to troubleshoot. Then the students email their project ahead of time with questions, and in the class they do some more troubleshooting. And they use this word cognitive apprenticeship. So the student is seeing how the instructor does the troubleshooting, and they're kind of speaking out their thought process and walking through it. So what I like about this, it's very customized to the students and the student projects. It's not something you could get in a MOOC or just through Google or anywhere else. We're really getting at the secret sauce, so to speak, of that instructor, specifically to what the students want. What I like is I think it's using class time very well. You know, they do some readings and quizzes ahead of time and in class, and this is kind of the heart of the flipped classroom, is we utilize the instructor as well as possible during the class time. Perfect. That's a great lead-in to the next topic, which is forum, so thank you. Great, great, great. So, and we'll talk a lot about forums, but that's a great way. And then again, the idea of there's points assigned to it. So we want to talk about how do you do forums. So a lot of you use Sakai. Are any of you using forums? Some of you, yes. I know Frank is. Okay. So we're going to get now into the concept of interactivity, and I have a cartoon for you. Watching, I told you I like to dance, so just watching won't do it. So it kind of, to me, sort of sends home that, and yet some subjects we kind of think it, and some do lend themselves more. We want to advocate, though, some kind of interaction. And this slide says, well, let's consider different types of interactions. I mean, there's so many ways you can think of interactions, right? Different groupings. But here's one for you. What I like about this is it talks about student with the content. Because some people think of interaction as human interaction. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about student interacting with the content, practicing the content, showing mastery of the content. They can do that with working with the instructor, working with other students, or working in a forum, in a quiz, writing out an essay, whatever, working with the content, doing something. Hopefully that feeds into the task that was the genesis of your learning objective. Let's look at forums versus assignments. So some of you are using forums in Sakai. Are any of you using assignments in Sakai? Some of you. Okay, good. A number of you. So some of the differences are it's public. Forums are public within the classroom. Everything is secure, of course. So that's one of the main differences. Another thing at the top I put that is suited to principle-based work. So this concept comes from Robert Horn and information mapping, and I'm going to get into a little bit later. He said, if we think of things as knowledge or skill, on the skill side, something could be more procedural, step 1, 2, 3, or it could be more require guidelines, require judgment each time it's done, maybe implemented differently in different environments. Does somebody have something that they think is more principle-based that they teach? Probably in the university there's quite a few things. Versus something more procedural. I don't want to pick on physical therapy because I don't know anything about it yet. I'm just so drawn to you. I suspect there are certain things that are a little more done similarly each time, and some things that may require you to understand more about underlying structures and do things slightly differently each time. I have some examples, but the idea here is that principle-based. So you wouldn't bother to do a forum that says, how do you fill out this form? Okay? Or what are the 3 steps to do X, Y, Z? Something that's it's more rote, okay? You want to do a forum with something that sparks conversation. That's kind of the idea. So it's the Sakai model and the academic learning management system models are very university-based. They're really different from the corporate models because they have a whole kind of model of a classroom, and there's an instructor, and there's discussion. So the whole idea of a forum is it's kind of supposed to be like a class discussion. So, you know, you might ask a student, oh, what are the steps to 1, 2, 3, but you wouldn't make a whole discussion out of it, right? So just to kind of keep in mind. The feedback on the professor's side on the forum could be either within the forum or could be private. I've definitely done both. You can set up subgroups in Sakai. So if you have a very large class or you want to break up students by groups, you can create subgroups. You can also take an assignment, which is private, and ask the students to also put it in the assignments tab, also put it in a forum, and then that can spark some discussion. Okay? You can either do it that week, the same week they turn it in, or you could delay it. So there's some options for you. And I'm also trying to be sensitive to the load that you have. You know, the teaching load you had is pretty heavy. So this is a way to kind of double dip on the assignment, especially if it's a very important key assignment. You can grade it, they turn into assignments, and you can have some discussion around it if it's suitable for that. Now let's look at assignments. They're private. You can attach any kind of deliverable. That's actually true in the forums as well. If you do a student demonstration video, you can attach it. So anything could be submitted. The feedback is absolutely private, so no other students see it. I have this kind of beef with Sakai where I just kind of wonder if students are going in and seeing stuff because they're not notified. So sometimes I'll double do it, whereas I put the feedback in Sakai and I also email it to students, right? When it's in my buffer and copied in, just to make sure they get it as soon as possible. I don't know if that's a best practice or anything, but anyway. You can do journaling. So since it's private, you could have some kind of ongoing assignment where they keep adding to it. And you can attach any kind of worksheet, rubric, etc. in the assignment tab. Of course, you can also do that in the forum, but it might be not as apt, you know, for that type of assignment. Here's an example. So this is from the research course that I'm just finishing up. So this is for the first, so I'm just showing you an example. For the first week, it says, identify a societal problem your classmates could understand, such as a problem in education, ecology, nutrition, etc. Write the problem statement, variables that can be studied, and how this problem could be studied. So because it's the first week, we're just working on prior knowledge. They will eventually develop their own project, but here we're just saying, let's just start to dive into what is research and so forth. And then, and notice I'm kind of encouraging them to pick something sort of interesting, I think, you know, with the kind of things I'm asking them to do. And then I give a specific assignment for responses. So I work at apps with Frank, and so I'm still teaching for apps, which is now UC. So this is one of our courses. So we give a specific, so our requirements were you have your original post by a certain date, and then 2 responses. Here's another example. This one we ask them to, in the forum, post an assignment, and then the response is find 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses. So, of course, a consideration with the forums is, since the work is public, of the feelings of the person. I've usually found I've found people to be very polite. I don't know if has anyone else found some negative experiences in forums when they're reacting to each other's work? Yes, Frank says yes. Yes? So what I found with apps is they're older, I mean, they're working adults, and they're extremely polite. I mean, and I have had people say, well, have you considered this? And so I've had very good experiences, and other places I've taught have been working adults as well. And so I have not had problems, but, you know, all over the internet it's just flame wars, you know, going on, but they're anonymous and they're not graded, and so hopefully students behave. Here's another one. This is actually, this is the assignment, and the only reason I showed this is that we link to a worksheet. So that can help you with the assignments. You know, it could be anything at all as long as it could be posted. So basically they just kind of fill out this worksheet. And then here's, I just captured it. You don't need to read it. But so any existing worksheets that you have for your face-to-face, you can then put them online. You can, it seems like there's sort of a pattern of how people enter into online. Sometimes they just use gradebook, or they just use the syllabus. They may just use resources. But as you kind of move along in your progression, you know, I encourage you to use the assignment tool, and you can take some even existing assignments you have and put them there. And then you have the time stamping. What is your name? What is your name? I'm sorry, you're busy.
Lynn Rain from Undergrad Social Work.
Okay, so Lynn was talking about the time stamping. So that's a nice feature that the assignments have. Okay, onward. So here's some best practices for discussions, and these are also in your handout. So this handout has content on discussions, specifically, and then on quizzes and other practice exercises. So first we want to look at how to write the discussion board questions, and then kind of how to respond. So they work best when students are somewhat knowledgeable about a topic. So that they did the pre-reading, or you know, working on prior knowledge. Personal experiences can be a great area depending on your subject. Okay, they have to have some knowledge. Okay, so it says here, thoughtful questions should do two things: show what they've learned, and encourage them to show how they can apply it. So this forums can be a good place to have them kind of discuss some kind of application. But again, forums are a discussion. So I know for me, since I come from the corporate world, I always think about in terms of deliverables. And the first online course I did, I had no discussions because I'm just in this mode of saying, what are the work products they have to create? And then the university I was working for, they added some discussions. They encouraged me to do that. So I'm not saying we want to have everything be discussions, because I really like the assignment idea and the work products that they create. The videos, the audio, the papers, all this stuff. So this is kind of in addition to this, I would say. Okay? The thing, too, is I think the discussion tool is very low tech. I mean, you're using Sakai and so forth. But the best practices of it are actually, they're in you. They're already in you. They're not technology based. Just here's an example. I'll just let you kind of take a look at a thoughtful question. Okay. How to participate in discussions. So the thing about all the stuff I have is it takes time. Okay? So you could assign discussions, and let's look at a whole range of how you can deal with it. You could just grade that they did it. You could give personal feedback to the student. You could have peer grading, or you could go in kind of a gold standard of discussions is that you're in there kind of stoking the flame. But it does take time. And I would consider assigning students to be moderators and giving them training on how to do some of the stuff. And yes, have you tried that? So these are some guidelines. It's in your handout for guidelines for your students. So I recommend if you choose to use forums, and also we want to have guidelines about the posts, okay? Either the original posts or the responses, or you might just get, hey, good job, Bob. I agree, you know, these little cheerful things. So you want to be strict about it. And the question of how to grade, I don't try to grade on ideas. I just try to grade on did they do the assignment and give the points. Typically, the forums have a little bit fewer points. This has been what I've seen than the assignments themselves. So if we say, you know, we say cite the strengths and weaknesses so say it's the response. Oh, okay. Did they give a strength and a weakness? They only give a strength, they don't get as many points. Or if they use the word wrong, the term wrong. I had one student write a whole paper on interventions, and there wasn't an intervention. I mean, it was wrong. It was just wrong. So we'll do this exercise. Just take a second to try to, right now, let's just do this. We're going to create mini asynchronous environments. Write a discussion question. Go ahead and do it. We'll just take a couple of minutes, and then I want you to report out. Something to consider with a forum is if there is one right answer, everyone will see each other's. If there's some nuances, a forum can be good. Otherwise, I would say make it an assignment, because then everyone has to do that same amount of work. They turn in, it's private. You know what I mean? So I would do a case in a forum where it's public if there are more nuances, and they can kind of build on each other's understanding. Yeah, it's really interesting. All these different. I'm doing a project with UCLA, a consulting project, and they want a heavy social element, and they have a social platform that they're kind of adding courses to. But the whole social world is not assignment focused. It doesn't necessarily match. So I would definitely try forums first, because your job, yeah, we want everyone discussing it, but you have to track the students' progress and assign grades and so forth. And some of these things that are a little more free form, like a wiki, well, who actually added stuff, or things where it's not as clear. A forum is very structured by week and so forth. And so, and you can, I mean, I did a thing one time, taught a class for Walden, and they just use outside blogging tools. So there's a lot of stuff you can use, but just kind of be careful. And again, what can you manage? What do the students understand in terms of what is due each time, and then what can you manage? Here's a few guidelines for you. And then also in your handout, there's some more guidelines, but I want to move on to quizzes. So I think and I just like this graphic. It's so stupid. Can any of you do any of these dances? Any of you, the mashed potato and the, okay. So tests and quizzes. Sorry, I digress. So here's some things. Here's some things that why we do tests. So let's see. The obvious one: evaluate learner performance. Evaluate the course. If no one can pass the test, of course, we have some problems. Provide a learning experience. So I like to say any activity could be a practice exercise or a quiz. It depends on whether or not you give feedback and whether you're tracking it. So you may have activities in your class and students learn a whole lot, but you may treat that as practice. It's not graded. So, but you could take anything we've talked about. Forums. Forum could be a quiz, right? If you grade it and you say they have to do it, it's some kind of an assessment. Or it could just be that it's optional, or you want them to do it, but you're not going to track it. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on the difference between the two. This is something I kind of mentioned before. We want to know the thing we're teaching, is it a knowledge or skill? And then in the skill bucket, is it procedure or principle based? And that can give us some direction in terms of the type of practice exercise we want to implement. So here's a procedure is a little bit more chronologically a group of steps. And maybe at the university level we don't see that much. I've worked a lot with entry-level people running cash registers, people following safety procedures, a lot of this stuff, and I definitely saw a lot of that, okay? And those are easier to teach and easier to grade. This is some guidelines for you. Use directive steps. So if you want students to follow X, Y, Z, and we do this a lot when we help people with Sakai, just try to give very simple procedures. You know, do this, 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 a checklist or a recipe, okay? Principle-based may be things that could be adapted to different situations, may require more judgment. Okay, and here's some examples. So we already talked about some of those may be more appropriate for forums. Okay, maybe done a little bit differently each time, requires some judgment. I suspect that many of you teach more principle-based tasks than procedural tasks. So here's some examples. What would the first one be? How to draw blood. Procedure. What about number 3? Principle-based, yeah. Now this one I'm not sure. This might go either way. Intake a patient. Maybe there's a procedural element, and there's principle-based in terms of how you interact with the patient. And part of what we want to, when we think about what do we put online, you may choose to put some of your more procedural stuff online and then deal with the principle-based stuff in person. So maybe there are certain Or teach your conceptual stuff online. You know, that's the pre-work and the test and so forth. And do more your skills in person. So these are just some other considerations for you as you're trying to kind of parse out your course and figure out what you might want to put online. You can, I know, you know, like I said, some of the publishers have online simulations so that you can have some kind of drills for procedures online. Those things do exist. I don't know. You'd have to check with your publisher. But you can practice procedures online. I don't know if you've ever seen typing tests, you know, things like that. You might want to look into stuff like that. So students can build a certain level of proficiency potentially outside of class and come into class and work at that higher level in Bloom's. Okay. Another thing we want to talk about is use versus remember. And this is from David Merrill. So he said, what if we take Bloom's taxonomy and just squish it into 2 levels? Either the students give me back what I gave them. So here's the steps for the procedure. Here's the definition. This is the map, and this is where California is, whatever. That's stuff that I taught. Or they can apply it in some way. I think this is helpful, too, because it kind of helps me say, I want to make sure we apply. And this could be a way that you go, well, I'm going to do remember level outside of class and application in class. So here's a couple things to think about. Content type. Is it knowledge or skill? And under skill, is it procedure or principle? And then what is the level of performance we're going to ask people for? Use versus remember. This is an example. Again, it's a little hard to read. This is from an MLOS course, bachelor's. I'm going to read it to you, where they're using a quiz in a very applied fashion. So it's called The President is Fired. You have 60 minutes to address 18 memos in your inbox. Replied briefly to each one, how you'll handle it, and so forth. So this is in Sakai quiz, very applied, creating a simulation. I thought that was a very clever use of Sakai quizzes. The quiz feature has a lot of options in terms of timing, randomization, and so forth. But just, you know, you just can use this basic level. If you can be creative and build around these examples and stories, you can make a very rich applied experience. And then you don't have to grade it either. That's another nice thing about the quizzes. And the students do the pre-work before you come to class. Yeah. This is actually an example from Pearson. This was for organizational behavior. So this was a simulation, photo-based. So this is an example where the publisher provides something. This had a lot of theory in it. I've never seen a simulation with so much theory. So you actually walk through a scenario. It was in a retail setting, so good applied kind of thing. I don't have to write it. I just assign it to the students. The thing is, these publishers have their own learning management systems. So I wanted it to be so that, because the thing I worked on, other teachers were going to use it, the student had to bring some kind of result from the publisher's LMS into Sakai, so that the instructor did not have to go and learn that LMS. So that's what I chose to do when I worked on this particular course. Or you could just have them do the simulation and then take some element of it and put it in a form or an assignment to kind of link the two together. Do you know what I'm saying? Because, okay, some notes. So the publisher has their own, so learning management system is what Sakai is. That's the category of software. It's an educational tool, platform. So these publishers have their own. The students log in and so forth. So that's fine. I think it's worthwhile. There's a lot of great resources there. But if you don't have them bring something into Sakai, now the instructor has to go into that tool because there's no talking back and forth. So what I would do is I would have the students, say there's some kind of outcome of the simulation, like some score or something, I would say bring it into Sakai. Or if there's some kind of printed results, they have to post it in Sakai in an assignment. So the student has to make that connection. But I had good luck with Pearson. Their rep came and talked to me and walked me through the whole thing. And so in very little time, I had a lot of great online activities for my course. And then just the last thing is talking about, here's another comic for you, performance-based tests. There's a comic. So this person is very engaged in the topic, but they're just not interested in taking tests. Any last thing? Do you use any performance-based tests that you want to share with the group? In my experience, there are a lot of good applied assignments that I see that faculty do. Does anyone want to share an example of an applied performance-based assignment they do? Is it a test? It is because we assess it. It's something that's part of the grade. I don't know if you call it a test. Anyone want to give any examples? A final assignment, a performance assignment, anything like that? You know what I'm saying? No, okay. So we say a test and assessment is a practice. They're the same thing. Okay, you're grading it. So, but it's probably best if it's performance-based. So if you're asking students to do whatever that thing is that's as close to your content that you want to convey to them. Okay, any other examples? Any other examples of performance-based? That's a great example. You can't do the recipe unless you know how to conjugate the verb. We assume. Okay. Yeah. Any other examples? No? Have we sat here long enough? So that's it for me today. Thank you for coming. We'll push out some additional references. Please email me with any.